and welcome to Chain Reactions, a weekly live stream from Myosin XYZ, the leading global marketing network, and hosted by yours truly, Blake, and my co-host, Polina. Tune in each week as we jam on the latest happenings in the wild and wonderful world of Web3. We're live on unlonely.app every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern, and release the pod every following week on Tuesdays. Now, let's talk Chain Reactions.
I'm ready to go. You good to go? All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Chain Reactions. It's our weekly live stream hosted by yours truly and my co-host Polina. How you doing, Polina?
Hi. All good. How are you?
Doing well. Very excited. This is our weekly live stream podcast where we talk to founders and CMOs and heads of marketing at some of the most innovative and interesting companies within the on-chain crypto space. And really excited to have Jay on today. Jay's a homie. We've been chatting for a while. We've been dancing at some things, and he's been at Eco. And I'm really excited to have him on to talk all around stablecoins, the future of finance, and what's coming up. So with that in mind, welcome, Jay. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to chat everything that we have in store.
Exactly. Well, let's get into things. I think there's a lot to cover. It's a really exciting time, obviously, for stablecoins in general. I don't want to date ourselves too much, but some exciting news, at least in the U.S. The Genius Act passed the Senate yesterday, which doesn't fully guarantee everything, but it's pretty much a done deal, it feels like. Very exciting news. So with all that in mind, I guess, Jay, would love to have you tell us a bit more about yourself, kind of your journey into crypto marketing, Web3, and then how that all led to you coming to Eco and, the work you're doing there.
Yeah. In terms of background, I always like to start almost from the very beginning. It's kind of weird, but maybe a little bit of a hint from my background, but I was actually in music before crypto. And so I founded a music publication during the Bloghouse era in around like 2010. And that was when streaming didn't exist. That was when social media was in its infancy, like in terms of marketing at least. And so there's a lot of tools at our disposal for people to use and try. And so I was not a formally trained marketing. I didn't even go to school for it actually, even after that. But I just learned it while just kind of trying a lot of these new tools. And at the same time, kind of came across Bitcoin that was like not really taken too seriously, but taken seriously enough. But really until about 4 or 5 years later, the music publication got fairly big. We amassed around 2 million readers a year by 2012. So 2 years later, I was also pretty young at the time. So I was wondering, holy shit, how did this actually happen? And one of the main things that stood out was this category called marketing, effectively, and dove into that a little bit more. Crypto was kind of in the background, trading Bitcoin here and there, and just getting a little bit more serious as each year passed. And by 2015, I started working at an ad agency called Ogilvy and Mather. That was where I was predominantly a brand strategist, focused also on digital marketing and focused on financial brands, tech, fintech brands, and also tech brands. And then that's when the convergence started. That's when crypto brands started to come. Actually, one of the first big brands I worked on and pitched, and we actually ended up winning, was Circle. So Circle didn't even have USDC at the time. They were competing against Venmo. They had 4 different products. One was called Circle Pay. The next one was called Circle Trade, Circle X, which ended up becoming Polonia X, and then not. There's a bunch of lore to that. And from there, then I realized I knew crypto very well just because of maybe the obsessiveness that we all have and still are pursuing to this day. But then also, how do you actually start to bridge together these marketing strategies and techniques and tools that I've kind of learned in more of the traditional capacity, starting with music and then branching into something more a little bit relevant to crypto. So I worked at the ad agency for about 2 to 3 years. I ended up founding my own agency with a co-founder of mine, where we focused on ICOs. ICOs were big, and so we actually did a decent amount of work there. Some brands still exist, some don't. And then after that, wanted to actually just get into the belly of the beast. Worked at AirSwap to lead marketing there. We were one of the first DEXs on Ethereum in 2017. We ended up getting acquired by Consensus in 2019, right before COVID. And then after that was speaking with a bunch of the early Avalanche founders. So Gun was one of them, ended up getting hired as the marketing lead there. And Avalanche didn't exist also at the time. So it was really making it exist from a brand perspective, making sure that the product marketing strategy worked, and then scaling it. And so at its peak, we had a team on the marketing side, including community designers, DevRel, kind of everyone under the sun. When it comes to go to market, we had about 50 total people. So that was like an incredible scaling effort from basically myself and my head of comms, Patrick Sutton, who's at Kraken now. He's an incredible person to know in the space. And that was like an incredible ride, not only because everyone knows Avalanche now, but if you actually were with us from day zero, people really did not like Avalanche. People really wanted us to fail all the time. And marketing was not actually seen in a positive light for a very long time. And so I feel like that was actually a motivating factor. And I spent 4 years there. So after that, I was looking for kind of a different challenge. One thing I loved about Avalanche is the experience, like I said, but one thing I didn't like about Avalanche, it's not Avalanche's fault, but it's just if you're picked on a settlement layer, you are in that settlement layer's ecosystem. If I tweeted, dare I tweet anything about Solana when I was at Avalanche, I think my Twitter account would probably be bombed by half the world who loves Avalanche, right? Or half the people that love Avalanche. So joined Eco actually a little over a year ago now. And Eco has been around for quite a bit. They've been working on kind of a currency and application more on like the fintech side or the fintech crypto side. And they finally kind of came to this realization that this new protocol direction is really what makes most sense for the team. And so I actually signed on for that. We did a bunch of brand building and debating, trust building, and then right now we're kind of in this optimization mode. As of May last month, we had the highest metrics organically for social, including Twitter and LinkedIn, website traffic, search strategies that we've kind of deployed as of last Q4. There's a bunch of all-time highs. So things are really good, but we're getting more aggressive and figuring out how best to keep setting hopefully new all-time highs, at least on like the engagement side. For our marketing strategy.
Hell yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that's a great journey you just walked us through. And it's incredible I'm sure even you love to kind of like take a look back at them and be like, wow, like ICO days, like, Circle before I had USDC, like you're an early mover, Jay. You get in early on the ground level. So maybe that's a good sign for stablecoins.
I feel like I would caveat that as marketers, we're best storytellers for better or for worse. And so that story I've refined over the 30 podcasts I've done probably in the last 5 years. I left out all the bad on purpose.
As one does.
Yeah.
So just to kind of, circle back a little bit on Eco, what is Eco building? You mentioned something about stablecoins, right? And then you said that they were pivoting towards something new that created ultimately this all-time highs now. And you picked it as your next challenge in the career, right? So what are they building that caught your eye and you created a challenge for you worth pursuing?
Totally. I think the main thing that attracted me to the project first and foremost was the team. And so even though the pivots, most people would categorize as failure is a strong word, but lack of a better word, like a failure in a company's life cycle, I actually looked at as a way to validate and inform my decision for the next move, right? Because if you're thinking about early stage companies, you basically have to look at the founders maybe and maybe the investors, but I don't really like to follow that signal all too much. And so there's not much to deal with. But with Eco, actually, there was the privilege of looking at past products they built, how they went to market with that, how they actually built that out. And so they had a few things. They had a currency, they had an application, and then they also had a kind of like an on-chain payments application that allows you to spend stablecoins as easily. And so all of that kind of ladders up to this difficulty that there was actually no infrastructure that existed to make it easy to interact with stablecoins across chains, across ecosystems, across asset types. And so that was continuously becoming a problem, even to this day, and moving forward into the future. We're going to see more stablecoin issuance. We're going to see more chains deploy. We're going to see more L2s and rollups deploy. And that's going to only fragment things even more. And so because I was able to see the products that they built, I had confidence. And then I also, in my own kind of world, believe that fragmentation is probably not great. And I think most people hold that opinion, especially from a UX perspective. And so I felt like the problem was actually real and something that we can actually tackle based on the strengths that existed in the past and then also the problems that exist today. And that's what I kind of sign up for now. And the way I describe Eco is Eco makes it easy for any application to accept stablecoins despite or regardless rather of the stablecoin type or the network that those stablecoins are on. That's like a base level kind of pitch. As we build out other parts of the system to create the complete protocol, it'll probably have to shift a little bit. But I really like this idea where stablecoin types, I count USDC on Optimism and USDC as on Base as two different types. Why? Because most people do. It is the same asset technically, of course, but I think from an experience perspective, it's felt as a different asset. You use different RPCs to configure to connect to the chains. You have to use different wallets sometimes, and there's all these kind of UX fragmentation. And so when you actually think about where we're at today, I believe we have over 20 stablecoin types that are live across 10 chains. And how can you actually now make that palatable for the everyday crypto professional, maybe, or kind of people who are the bottom funnel? You can actually integrate all that in one integration. And I think that's really the aha moment. So I think that's where we've come to with a lot of the validation for our narrative. And we're still trying to fine tune that moving forward.
That's incredible. And so, I mean, I'm just trying to, maybe for anyone listening, right? Yeah, I feel like there's so many like simple way, like, would it be fair to say like almost like layer zero for stable coins, maybe, or not even, it's not a bridge, but you know what I mean, right? It's kind of
yeah, I know what you're saying. Like that's a helpful analogy, but I would also even push that that's probably too crypto in the weeds.
Yeah, like the Stripe, maybe. I don't know, but yeah, I'm trying to figure out what bridge.
One analogy I've used is it's like Plaid, because Plaid, when you see as a consumer, when you see Plaid, I don't think any of you guys know either. That's not a dig on any one of us. It's just we don't know how Plaid actually works. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. For us, at least, at the end of the day, I see the Plaid little like crosshatch icon. I know that my bank account is accepted there, and I can actually use that financial application. And so that's the, I think, midterm vision is if you see that eco logo on any of the onboarding flows, the swaps flows, using applications, you'll know, okay, like my stables are accepted here. And so I've been taking a lot of our marketing team, we really push ourselves to not get into the classic crypto headiness, because even it's not the grandma test. I don't care about like our grandparents. They're like 20 years away from using this stuff anyways, probably. But I really care about us as people who are professionals. We also need to understand how this works. Because if you get down to the infrastructure for the first, let's say, I don't know, like infrastructure really started to get big, like 2013, 14, 15, when kind of Ethereum started to come into the picture. People really got to this, like, let's really talk about the nuances of the technology. And that goes over everyone's head, including the people that are building it. And so I think we're kind of going back to a little bit of how do we actually still address the target audience, which is probably developers, professionals who know 201 information, 301 information, but how do you still make it so it resonates and then they can tell that story on your behalf?
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense too, because I think like as we're talking about kind of escaping from the kind of crypto rabbit hole, right? I think we're already seeing this kind of convergence of if it's not clear, I like to speak in analogies, right? And I think kind of pointing to a different situation. Like I remember in early direct-to-consumer days in New York, right? There were a lot of people who were like, oh, direct-to-consumer is coming in. Like, I'll never have a retail store. It's going to kill all retail. And that wasn't the case, right? Because like, I will always remember this quote from the co-founder of Everlane, which is one of the largest D2C brands back in the day. There was a quote, I think it was like 2014, 2015 maybe. It was like, we're never going to have a physical retail store. That's not the case, because as they scaled, they realized eventually they need retail stores. And then the retail stores that adopted, what is now known as e-commerce, like direct consumer, same thing, they survived. And the ones who didn't died, and they all came together. And I feel like right now with crypto and finance and stable coins, we're seeing the same thing. Because I think like there's, Mantle has mental banking. I think Robinhood obviously is pushing deeper into crypto. JP Morgan just announced their stable coin. Like these worlds are all fast converging. So it makes a lot of sense to me, I think, how you guys are approaching and seeing this space. Following up on that though, I would love to better understand, are you guys the only people doing this right now? Or, obviously stablecoins are a hot space. There's a lot of people trying to build that infrastructure. So I'm just curious about that, I guess, like who else is doing this and, how are you guys competing? Is it the marketing? Is the product fundamentally that much better? Is it distribution? Is it the partnerships? How do you think about it?
We're definitely not the only people targeting stablecoin infrastructure, as I label that category, but I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of field to play on. And I think most people would probably agree with that. So there's obviously all the way up to the fiat to stablecoin kind of flows, which
No.
I think there's more room there, to be honest. But for all intents and purposes, there's a lot of people playing in that market. On and off ramping has been kind of a topic and
Yeah.
a field that people have been innovating within since early days of Ethereum, probably,
Yeah.
and even early days of before Ethereum, actually. And so from there, you can slice and dice that with customer segments, because there's institutional customer segments and enterprises who want closed systems. There's more permissionless systems like that are kind of crypto friendly, that are okay with being on permissionless systems. Sorry. And then similarly, you can do that all the way across the board. And so when you actually go to where we're tackling, I don't want to necessarily say we're the only people that are tackling it, but I think we have a very unique focus strategy where we're focusing on stablecoins on purpose. We could actually go to other asset types if we really wanted to, but I think focus is very important for a go-to-market strategy and validation. And then also number two is, I think we're focusing a lot on a very B2B strategy. There is a B2C component to it to some degree from a liquidity provisioning and amassing liquidity perspective. But from a actual integrations perspective, we need these businesses, applications, solutions to integrate eco, like I said, with the Plaid example, so then we can actually accelerate our growth trajectory. I think you kind of said this, but I'll rephrase a little bit. It's like, what is our moat here? What is something that we're actually confident in? So I think actually, like I alluded to before, our team's very strong technically. We have deep payments experience individually before Eco, but also the team that has been with Eco for a while also has that experience through kind of the areas that they've touched on before we went towards the Eco protocol. And so I think from there, we've started to focus on capital efficiency and UX as our North Star. If we can actually enable amazing UX for the applications, then whatever design decisions, whether they're highly opinionated or not, we make, we know we have confidence towards that North Star. I think another part that you also mentioned is marketing. This might be a little bit egotistical, but I feel pretty confident with the marketing that we're doing. But it's also on the real. It's really about applying a lot of the learnings that I've carried through all the experience that I've kind of outlined to you. And there's plenty of stuff, like I said, that don't work. I just don't highlight that in my sizzle reel for the first 30 seconds of my intro, but I'm down to even explore that. Like there's plenty of stuff there. Let's see if it works in the context of eco. It might. If it doesn't, well, then we'll move on. And then we at least have a foundational element that I've now tried and validated it for over, potentially even dozens of brands because of advisory and just like side conversations and things like that.
From your experience with Avalanche and now with Eco, what would you say is the hardest part in marketing infrastructure? There's so many things.
The hardest part, I think the first thing that came to mind, there's a ton of hard things, but the first thing that came to mind is when you're given crypto blockchain infrastructure, it's becoming less and less so like this, but most of it is unprecedented. And I don't mean to say that in like a wow is revolutionary, but no one's done it before. And so I can't look at case studies. I can't look at ways language is being developed. I can't look at references from our category as much, especially when I was at Avalanche. It was like L1 playbook. There were some people that were doing it, but they weren't doing it that well. And so you just had to kind of come up with your own playbook. Now, that's not to say that you can't reference Web 2, but you also don't want to get too stuck into, okay, well, just because it worked in Web 2 means it's going to work in Web 3. So you really have to have that Web 3 deep subject matter expertise, almost obsessive, to be able to really stress test that before, of course, you can actually start to validate with your prospective customers, and they'll let you know honest truths whether or not something's going to work. So I think that's like the top line thing that comes to mind.
And so I'd love to follow up on that, right? So I think we talked about like what works, what doesn't. I mean, I think it's very unique. Well, I guess the thing I'm really wondering is like, so what has, frankly, like the eco marketing strategy been, right? Because I when at least on Twitter, right, like what I see is, well, wearing one of the shirts, right? You have this great like stables campaign, right? Horses, stables, stable coins. That's great. Some beautiful imagery, right? Some great brand assets, some great events. But have you thought about it? I think you alluded to search earlier. Like, what have the best channels been? Like, what is the focus? And because And then your ICPs kind of, I would imagine it's, you want people to build using Eco, but then you also, there's a lot of different ICPs, right? Because then you also want banks and other financial players to integrate. So you have to consider many different ICPs. So how do you think about all that at a high level? Yeah.
The first strategy, I'll break it down exactly. So we unveiled the Eco protocol and its new brand in September 1st. From then, it was really about brand messaging and what our North Star is. We were pre-product then, and so we really had to sell to people what the 5-10 year vision is. We focused on this kind of sentiment of accelerating how money moves on chain. This idea that we want to make things faster, more efficient, easier to use. That was a really good North Star because we can just push content and make people believe through traditional digital marketing channels. So we just basically mapped out a funnel and did a lot of guessing on what the customer funnel looks like in the beginning, and then started mapping channels. Now, when I tell you what our marketing team is comprised of, we have 2 people on the creative side and then 1 social strategist who kind of marketing strategist who joined like a few months ago, actually in February. And so up until February was basically, I'm kind of the main person in the middle. And then we have creative support, which is like excellent, but otherwise execution was all me. So realistically, I can't also just suggest crazy, outlandish campaigns. We didn't even have agencies, or we still don't. And so for there, it's really 3 different segments: social, website, and content as it relates to written content. And then I think one other thing that we started to add very quickly starting in December was podcasts and interviews for more earned media to then start to establish us above the Eco bubble, if you will. And so that's really what we've been focusing on. And when you think about social, for example, we do a 4-1-1 strategy. We establish trust through educational content for 4 posts, or that ratio effectively. 1 is a soft sell, 1 is a hard sell to really sell exactly what we're selling, which is integrations of Eco, for example. And we just keep looping that over and over. When we saw the organic strategy flow pretty highly and work really well eventually, then I think that's when we start to optimize things and we start to figure out what's working, what's not. And we're then iterating over and over. And then, in December and January, we started to add search. We started to be more aggressive with unbranded search content. So like educational glossary terms, educational articles. That's also been doing pretty well. We also take risks in other areas. We have GIFs as well. Our Giphy stats, we launched this strategy 2 months ago. We've now hit 20 million views on our GIFs. I don't know how many downloads off the top of my head, but it's in the tens of thousands now. We're seeing them used in the wild, which is great. We have, event strategy, which is usually quarterly, nothing crazy. We go to 1 event a quarter and we try and maximize our presence there. And so it's all about optimization. And we are probably going to now veer into like a paid territory, start to experiment there, see if we can actually boost some of our efforts. And we're also going to start to get a little bit smarter on our customer segment. We talk about developers, but exactly who, transparently, I don't know exactly who yet. We have certain convictions on direction, but not necessarily like, oh yeah, these are the people that we're going to double down on. These are who we're going to talk about. And this is what we're going to optimize our strategy towards, I suppose.
I'm wondering, because in the beginning you said that you did a bunch of like testing of the funnel. I assume you had quite a few ideas for like how it looks like, who do you reach out to, and things like that. What was your approach to like messaging testing, and what you found really resonated? So what did you decide to double down on, basically?
I think with message testing, we just had to keep our eyes and ears open as aggressively as possible in the beginning. And so actually a lot of it happened in-person conversations, things like meetings, things like investor pitches, or just pitching new people, all types of people, not just crypto people too. And I've said, when people ask, hey, what is Eco? I've said this line hundreds of times at this point. But if you asked me, there's probably a recording somewhere online about it back in September. It is a little bit more convoluted, and you can almost tell when you actually compare it side by side. So I think it's a lot of like the leadership, the product team, we're just being really honest with each other on what's working, what's not. And even then, like I mentioned, I think earlier, we're doing another kind of shift in our positioning, not in direction, but just making a little bit tighter. And we're doing that right now. Why? Because the product has evolved, the timeline has evolved, in good and bad ways too. Like not necessarily, there could be things where we're like, okay, that didn't really work as well, or there's things that are okay, this is actually working. The narrative is actually much hotter. there's a lot of good topical news on stablecoins. So now I don't have to explain what a stablecoin is, even, which a couple years ago maybe we had to do that, right? And so I think that's always good to be nimble. And as long as you're using insights, it can be anecdotal. I would take that with a grain of salt, of course. But as long as you're using insights from your customers, I think you're directly going to be in the right place. And then making sure you map it towards business objectives. I'm going to be able to tell you if the all-time high I've been talking about for some of our marketing strategies working or not by simply seeing customers that come in. If they don't come in, there's something wrong with what I've been promising to my team effectively that we do with our strategy. And you can find that out in max a quarter, minimally a month.
Are you, in your strategy, you mentioned there's a lot of content, so there's a lot of search, writer, blog posts, things like that. Is there also an outbound element to it because because it's B2B, so I assume that there's some like cold outreach strategies that are going on. And in Web2 space, LinkedIn is like the place for B2B cold outreach. Is that something that works in Web3 as well, or what do you see most success with?
I think it works in Web3. That's where we're trying to get a little bit more aggressive on, because I think I see this a lot with companies as an example first before I kind of get into this, but a lot of people are like, I don't want to optimize for LinkedIn. I don't want to optimize for these channels because they don't really matter and everything's on Twitter. And I don't really believe that's true at all. Like, I think obviously there is a lot of energy in Twitter, and I don't think anyone's disputing that. But there are also net new customers. And as this industry continues to grow, that's only going to become more true. Like, even at Avalanche, we had a Facebook strategy, which people are like, why are you even doing that? But Facebook is actually one of the biggest social media platforms still, with at least prospective audience members. And actually, where we had no love in the beginning, no one cared about our channel in Facebook for the first few years. But once we got to the point where we're on CoinMarketCap top 10, well, guess what? Who cared? Facebook actually started to care a little bit more, and they started to get more engaged and whatnot. And so I'm like kind of pulling back on that strategy for certain things, but it's, again, sense and respond based on what you're actually seeing in terms of results. I think is really important there. I think outbound is very important. To go back to your initial question, we finally hired a head of BD who's predominantly focused on that. So we're going to focus on bottom funnel first, just to get hopefully quick wins, but we'll start to get more aggressive with probably genuinely pure cold outbound. And then there's a lot of really cool actually strategies that you can do that I've learned from kind of past sales work that I've done, even as a marketer. That's really cool in terms of automation, getting more people to open your LinkedIn DMs, for example, pitching it much more effectively. Then also having self-service product portals, having ways to actually demo the product on your own, all these kind of traditional B2B enterprise sales, B2B SaaS sales strategies.
What are your thoughts on like using founder-led content for this LinkedIn X?
Always a fan. I had a call earlier with a friend that I was trying to help him out a little bit on some of this stuff, but not everyone's ready for founder-led content. So I think I'm in the camp of, if you're not there, there's no reason to force it, because then it feels forced and actually might be more of a headache to execute than it is to actually try something else. So like with all these different questions that we're covering, they're all just different tactics that are just part of your toolkit. So if the wrench doesn't work, there's certainly another thing that could probably turn that screw maybe even more efficiently. But I'm personally, if you can actually optimize for it, founder-led personas across the board, not just execs, not just leaders, not just product leads, I think across the board is really important for startups, because those are the people that are kind of the unicorns of the industry. The people that you hire for DevRel, for example, but can do BD, can network, can also sell things, but can also have comments and feedback on the product. That's amazing. Same thing with marketers. Stereotypically, marketers, I've seen this at least on Twitter sometimes, marketers in crypto sometimes don't even use the product. That to me is wild. I just don't understand how I could even sell the things that I've sold without using them. And I think that's something that, again, is like a negative. But if you actually have someone who's well-rounded, you can actually have a much more holistic chance at success, or a higher chance of success.
For sure.
I'd love to zoom out. Oh, wait, sorry. I think there's a bit of lag on my end, so I apologize on that.
No, go for it.
But I apologize for interrupting, but I want to kind of zoom out for a bit and just kind of get your take. I think like I like to kind of, we can switch up the flow a bit, right? And so we just went really deep into the marketing weeds. I think now we can zoom out for a second and talk about, I think stablecoins in general, right? Like as this is continuing to take off, I heard earlier, right? Like you guys are thinking about expanding the ecosystem and the offerings, right? So as this market is heating up and as more people are adopting and more people are getting more interested, what are some of the things that you're cooking up, and how are you guys thinking about growth and expansion and eventually marketing these things, right? Whether it's geography, whether it's types of like where you guys sit in the stack and different ways you're helping your customers. Curious about that.
So the plan that we've had since launch actually is to have a holistic protocol that makes it easy to use stablecoins, or makes it easy for any applications to use stablecoins, but then in turn users as well. And with that vision, there's three key components. There's routes, which is currently live in beta. There's accounts, and then there's also crowd liquidity. I'll just do a quick overview. So routes connects chains and creates pathways for stablecoins to be transferred. And so that's really what's creating this multi-chain experience that you're seeing in the portal, which you can use to test out routes. It's at portal.eco.com, and you can actually use it right now and see how it all flows. Now, accounts is more on like the streamlining the accounts and wallet experience, I would say, or just like using the actual stable coins. And so you can have balance aggregation, you can have gas abstraction, so you don't actually have to pay with the protocol token, and you can actually just pay with your stablecoin balance, for example. These kind of this is a generalized term, but like quality life improvements, they are definitely much deeper, but we can actually get much more efficient. And if you actually merge the two, you can start to see, okay, wow, this is actually truly a UX play. And then crowd liquidity is a more of a focus on the people who have liquidity, the people who have stable coin liquidity. So at this stage, there's a few phases of that product, but the V2, so to speak, will have a really cool function that I'm super bullish on, which is it'll allow people who have stable coins in their wallet to earn passively yield on their stable coins. So instead of having to deposit or lock up their funds, it just works like a bank account. Think about your regular bank account. It would be absurd if all of a sudden, there's CDs, I suppose, but like it would be absurd if the bank was, hey, by the way, we're in a checking account, but you can't touch this money because we're actually using it for liquidity in some loan that we're loaning out to or something like that, right? And so the way passive liquidity works, or passive yield works, is you can actually just hold it in your wallet, and only when the network demands that liquidity to be used for something, it'll use it very quickly, but it happens very quickly, and then it just it rewards you for that use effectively. And so that's been kind of the vision until we release the whole protocol on mainnet. Right now we only have routes on mainnet as just for testing and things like that. And then longer term, I really would say the biggest thing that we're listening to is the market. We're listening to the customer segments. We're listening to the people that we're talking to closely, because stablecoins are still kind of changing every day. There's also different stablecoin types on the asset side. There's also different chains on this infrastructure and settlement side. And so I think we'll see what that looks like specifically. But broadly speaking, if you're thinking about stablecoins, eco should persist underneath as the thing that enables you to be able to use that on chain. And so that's like kind of the grander vision long term.
I love that. Yeah, and it's something obviously like I've been thinking a lot about, because we've been writing the stablecoin report, which you guys contribute to. So shout out to Jay and the Eco team. I think that's gonna be really exciting. We'll publish that next week. But yeah, I think like there's so much happening right now. Like, and then I think a lot of us saw that like JP Morgan, they just filed their trademark or whatnot for their stablecoin. So I'm also curious about like, how do you guys think about your partners when it comes to different chains, different stable? I mean, there's so many, as you said, right? And at a certain point, you're going to have to, like, what's the strategy there? What's the thinking as you kind of go through that? I'm sure like liquidity, just general transaction volume is probably the easiest place to start, but then there's still a lot of options, right? So how do you guys think about that?
I think measurement, you kind of touched on it pretty head on, which is transfer volume, but persistent transfer volume. Like how can you actually keep growing that from like an active user perspective? And then what that active user or active wallet is generating in terms of flows. I think one of the things that we're also sensing and responding to is understanding like which chains have more demand, which asset types have more demand. Even, a good example is Tether. Tether has a bunch of variants, but they're all technically Tether.
Right.
Open USDT, USDT 0. Who knows exactly how that's going to kind of come together in the next 5-10 years? Do those kind of persist, or do you have native issuance that kind of end up replacing it? It's not very clear yet. But when it comes to markets, we have certain hypotheses on customer types. So one example would be like DeFi, I would say, as a broad category, but more specifically, single chain deployed DeFi apps that would actually benefit from this eco integration, because then they can open up their customer segment to those 10 chains I talked about and 20 stablecoin types. That's a ton of new liquidity that application can now accept without actually having to switch really all that much in their strategy. They can actually still accept the stablecoin that's native to the chain that they're deploying on because that's their preference. But then you have this transfer mechanism in the middle to then give you that outcome when you need it. And I think a similar kind of category, but a little bit different, is more on like the onboarding flows. How can we actually go after wallets where way before they get to the application, they can actually decide, okay, these are the asset types that I need because I predominantly trade on Solana, for example, or I predominantly trade on Avalanche, or it doesn't matter where you go. And so these are things that still have yet to be like fully realized. We've only, for each of these 3 or 4 segments, we've only really started to have conversations with a handful of them. And a lot of them actually optimistically have been really keen. I think that's where we kind of bring this all together. They've really understood the pitch. Once we start to outline even like the routes, accounts, crowd liquidity, meta, and how everything all fits together, people are like, oh, wow, that's actually needed. And so I think we have really good anecdotal validation. It's all about now having that realized, integrated, launched on mainnet, and then most importantly, transfer flows. So as much as I'm really amped about our marketing success, it doesn't really, I don't say this in a negative way, but it doesn't really mean all that much, again, if the product isn't really growing in that right direction. So I'm really eager for that mainnet launch TBD, like the full mainnet launch at least. But for now, I'm also very pleased to the idea of this kind of soft mainnet launch because that we've kind of taken, which is something I've never done. I've always done the testnet to mainnet approach. And the reason why testnet was terrible is because it's almost just theory. It's like, oh, great, we can do, 1 million TPS in testnet. It's like, okay, because we have 2 nodes running that are like working on testnet and not like actual wallets interacting with the chain. That's more of an Avalanche example, for instance.
I'm curious also, at the end of the day, it's all about developer adoption, right? Whether or not they're going to use Eco, whether or not they're going to see the value in this improved UX that you guys are building. And there's always a cold start program, I think, for a lot of infrastructure problem for how do you get quality devs? And, in your strategy, the tactics are around content, social media, search, all of this are sort of, you have to have those, but on social, I think we all know, you can post amazing content, but it can also just be in complete echo chamber. So how do you solve that? How are you approaching, this developer adoption? What does your game plan look like?
Yeah, so I'm laughing because I think my right off the bat answer is, in the context of eco, I'm actually not sure we've solved that yet, but I'll give you context.
I'll give you more context.
Yeah, I'll give you more context as to why. So with Avalanche, especially the second or third year, we ended up finding our footing on types of developers and types of archetypes and all these programs that really brought in a really healthy ecosystem. By the time I left, we had potential, I don't know how exact numbers, but tens of thousands of developers or something like that are in the ecosystem. So it's quite humbling to come back here and we have start from 0 effectively. And then I was remembering how difficult it was to go from 0 to 1 even. And so I have really good conviction on the strategies per se, but it does take a lot of technical marketing, and I'm going to kind of just jumble up a bunch of things that I believe in. And I don't think there are any priority in terms of the order, but one is you got to go where the developers are. That's number one. And so where do they get their information? How do they solve their problems? If we're actually able to solve those developers' problems, then we become a brand that they start to respect. That doesn't mean you have conversion, but we can then start to be along their journey. So that's where you have content as ideation, or as a marketing strategy. You have workshops and all that. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's really to be able to create this community, like you suggested, to then start to build on its own. I think another one would be, I'm kind of countering this more so, but a lot of people say devs don't like to be marketed to. And I fire back and say, well, no one really likes to be marketed to in the way that we're describing. But I bet you that there are developers that certainly make product decisions simply because we are human, based on marketing comms, external information that companies, brands, products are sending you. Certainly. That has just always been the case. People are getting smarter, there are ad blockers, all those things, but there always is a way. And so I think that challenge is then really figuring out where we're getting to now is getting very specific on the developer archetype. So then we know exactly what their behaviors are, and then we can start to map out what that strategy looks like, or what the execution rather looks like, and then start to see if that works. And so we actually, the reason why I was laughing earlier is because it's semi-true, but also not true, in the sense that we've done a lot of good dev marketing. I think the final piece is how do we actually create that robust community? And we're just about turning to that. And so one good example, and I've seen a lot of people jump on this, and it's not necessarily a unique strategy by any means, but there's actually not that many dev-focused content YouTube channels or video content channels. What I mean by that is there are a lot of ecosystem project-specific channels. Adapt does a workshop with another integration, or another asset that issues. But the problem with that is it's very specific to that product. So let's pick L1. L1 has all their content. So Avalanche, for example, Avalanche is like, if you look at Avalanche's technical content, it is always project XYZ and Avalanche. But there really isn't a general purpose one. And so we were like, well, let's just create a general purpose one. So we created a series called Build on Chain. And the strategy there was, let's just focus on a specific problem that each product offers, or each project offers. So if it's, we had Zerion the other day. Zerion focused on one of their specific tools, not just build on chain with Zerion's whole stack, because that's also not that useful. No one's going to do a crash course on Zerion for 30 minutes of content, but just a specific use case, and then be values driven on how to communicate that. By the way, Zerion's SDK or whatever we did is really helpful for this use case. And we started to push that. We're getting really good metrics. We have shorts, YouTube shorts, and we have shorts on other platforms as well. And so we're getting probably 5-10K aggregate views on all of those shorts. Those shorts feed into the actual series. And now we have a really backed up pipeline where we have guests book until August now, I think. And it's simply because the demand was there. And so that's good validation. I guess carrot on a stick, kind of like the goal that I want to go towards is, how do we actually increase viewership live? How do we increase viewership from a recording perspective? And the thesis there was, we have a really good network. And so guests isn't that hard in the beginning, but we have to really we have to prove that this is actually useful. And so if we do that with everything we do, then I think developers will start to really respect Eco as a brand and us as individuals, hopefully also the technical people ultimately.
Does all this video content also live on YouTube in like a separate playlist, or what is the ultimate funnel? Okay.
Yeah, nice. There's a separate playlist. We really target an unbranded approach. And so there's an unbranded strategy here. Eco is of course branded throughout some of these things, but at the end of the day, the hero is the guest that's presenting. And so, strategically, actually, we've identified, especially not every time, but most of the time, companies that are just coming out, or companies who haven't invested in this. Why? Because when people search, X project and there's no content, but we're the only content, we're just going to naturally win that game for at least the foreseeable future until they start to push their own content out, or they start to book their own content. But for now, you can actually look, not necessarily naming any specific ones, but you can look at our playlist and Google the project name, or YouTube search the project name, and we're now trending on the top, usually number one, sometimes minimally on the first page. And so that's just the conviction. Yeah, that's why we have the conviction. Yeah, Blake's like, I got to see this. This is how we have the conviction for this strategy. We're doing that with stablecoins as well. And I don't want to necessarily create net new, podcasts if we don't have to, but this has been working pretty well for us.
It's also for search, right? Because nobody, like you said with Avalanche, nobody searches for Eco X Zerion. They search for how to solve a specific problem. Exactly. And then if you identify it, then it's a smart play. Also I'm assuming you probably use Reddit as well in your search efforts, because it's indexed now quite well.
We use Reddit, and then SEO is kind of converging more towards GEO, it seems, which is like the generative side. And so actually search results for most web focused brands have dropped significantly. I've seen figures as much as 30, 40, 50%. We're seeing the same thing. I'm sure everybody else is. And so even some of the traditional search keyword strategies that I've employed, they kind of died actually. It worked in November up until like February, and then all of it tanked. Why? We all know why. We all use GPTs, we all use these AI tools. They find the answers for us, and we don't actually have to look through search anymore. And so I'm not saying that search is dead, but I think it's very important for marketers, especially in a highly competitive space like ours, to stay up to date on some of those strategies. And so I've just done a lot of schooling the last few months on just like making sure I understand how this works. They're low-hanging things, right? Like you can actually prompt your robot.txt file to allow for crawling for these specific GPT bots, for example, just so you can start to get visibility. You can then figure out, what do these GPTs actually care? Well, ultimately, long story short, they care about really good content, and also similar thing like with search authority. And so you still have to play that game a little bit, but you're not going to get that like crazy uptick in that you might have gotten back in the search days. And then there's probably this unknown territory where everybody's trying to figure it out as we speak, because this technology is moving so quickly. And that's something that we're staying on top of. And if things aren't working for more than a quarter, then we'll probably pause that and we'll probably move on to the next thing. It's not worth our time unless we can solve it really quickly. But again,
unless it's
the
Facebook.
toolkit. Yeah, unless it's Facebook. Unless it's Facebook. Yeah, maybe I'm a Zuck stan, but the toolkit is like very vast, and so there's so many other tools that are still left in our marketing toolkit that we can still use.
No, I was just about to ask like what were the tactics for the geo, but you already covered that.
There are a lot of great YouTube videos actually. I watched. There's not that many like relative to the rest, but there's really good ones if you sort it by like published in the last 3-4 months, just because if you do something a year ago, it's probably outdated by this point. So it's good to use the 4 or 6 months.
It's changing so quickly.
And there's pretty good like low hanging, even like a team where
that's I guess on my list after this.
Oh, sorry. I think there was a lag on my end.
That
was on me. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. I think we have the last question before the fire round.
Perfect.
Really is what would...
I think there's like a real lag with Blake.
Yeah, there was a real lag for Blake.
I think I have a really bad lag, guys. Just ignore me. Go ahead. Yeah, something's happening on my end. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The last one is what would winning look like for Eco in let's say 1 year, maybe 2 years? I wrote first 2 years for myself, and then I'm thinking it's kind of long. Like 2 years is a whole lifetime in crypto, so maybe 1.
Okay, so winning in 1 year is we have really like at least a handful of really good customer segments that we've already doubled down on, and we have specificity in our strategy. So I think by that point, I'd expect that. That's usually the time where the product has been live for a little over a year, counting the testing period and the beta period. And I think that's enough time to get a lot of good traction there. So hopefully like the flows and the volume that's going through is much more consistent, and we can actually predict how to get to that next phase. And then the last component that I'm super excited about is crowd liquidity. That concept is really something that can make stablecoin liquidity or stablecoins just that much more interesting for people, just to put it simply. And I think that's also something that kind of reminds me, at least in theory, right, as we talk about before it launches, it reminds me of kind of the AMM moment when Uniswap really kind of put an AMM like cleanly into the market. I know there's like controversy on who actually did it first, but when Uniswap actually did it and grew out of that, I think it really showed the world that, oh, actually I can be my own market maker. But I think the catch was you have impermanent loss and a bunch of other confusing things that made it not really ready for everybody, but ready for a lot more people. And so I think that's where we're kind of a step ahead of, or not ahead, but one step in front of that, in the sense that we've learned from innovators like Uniswap. We learn from go-to-market strategies that are similar to that example. And so I think we can actually minimize some of the mistakes and actually maximize some of the positive outcomes. And so that's really what I'm really confident on. I think 2 years, we'll see, I suppose, but maybe as lofty as, like top 10 project, hopefully number 1 project in stablecoin infrastructure. I would say like, Avalanche, we got to like top 15 in the second year, I think, second or third year, I want to say. that being said, that was also a crazy run, but you never know, like sky's the limit. So we're hoping for that.
Awesome. No, that sounds like a good plan. I want to transition, since we have 5 minutes left, into our quick fire round of questions. So without further ado, the first one is, what is the most underrated tactic in Web3 right now?
Most underrated tactic is search.
Okay. I think this is the first one that we have heard on the pod. I was expecting you to say video or something because you're doubling down on this content series.
No, I love it, but that's like rated.
Okay, fair. What is the most overrated one?
Most overrated, Twitter.
Really?
Yes.
Just because the search is the okay.
I think everyone's playing that game, and that's not to say again like that it's not effective and it has ways to elevate your brand, but it's only one channel out of a huge mix of organic, earned, paid. There's so much more left, and so I think a lot of emphasis is put on Twitter right now, and I think it's almost too much for some people.
It's true. I do feel like it's a bit of a walled garden that we're just subjecting ourselves to for whatever reason.
It's like 100 people seeing the same thing.
Yeah. Which brands or projects right now in the space that are not eco that you think are crushing it, just for inspiration, things that you're looking at, that you're following?
I've said Aave for a long time because I think since the rebrand and they like really leveled up their game, especially once they got to like the place that they got to post kind of ETHLend transition, they really stepped up and realized that branding and marketing is really important for their strategy. So always giving a shout out. You can see that everywhere through their events, through their like app branding. Their product also caught up to that a little bit. And so they really eat, breathe, and sleep that, I think, which is really cool to see, because back when Aave was getting big during the ICO phase, no one cared about marketing. They cared about marketing from like a let's make a cool trailer and let's raise a lot of money and let's hire a bunch of KOLs, but they didn't care about like the 45 minutes and hours worth of conversation we've been talking about. One other one I would say probably as like a net new entrant is probably like anyone that's really doing like this is not less about holistic, but I think taking that approach where you're actually actively thinking about what you're doing in a meaningful way. Like we recently collabed with Zerion and Para, so those teams like and Jules from Zerion I've worked with for some time, and those teams are really intentional about what we do. And so even working with those intentioned projects, those intentioned teams, it's like night and day difference. The opposite would be, short-term kind of gains and short-term wins. And so it's just quite refreshing to be able to work with that. And you actually get really good outcomes out of that. And so I think that type of kind of fundamental thinking, that deep thinking that is required for complex things like what we do, huge respect.
I think that's so rare in our industry, actually, having worked, on an agency side and like with a lot of founders. It's all the time things must be done yesterday. And it's very refreshing when you come to the team that really wants to like settle in a bit and like take a step back and look at everything and all of it. So I also am bullish on Zerion in that way. I really like the brand and the product itself. Okay, and the last one. The last one
sorry.
is,
Am I how?
I think so.
Not as bad.
No, I think it's good.
It's a plus one. Sorry,
you're good,
but yeah.
You're good.
I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to devalue it also, logo in a lot of the times, because a lot of projects are strapped for budget or things like that. Like they can't pull off an event or something like this. And logo or like a social or a blog announcement is really all they can do. I think in an age of AI, VO3 and stuff like this, I think we have a lot more creative tools with a lower budget that we can actually pull off something more meaningful. So I'm excited to see more on the creative side, like developments in that area in crypto space. But yeah, taste, we lack taste in the space a lot of the times. The last question for Jay would be, looking back at the past year, so what was your biggest learning as a Web3 marketer?
That's a really good one. I think biggest learning, so since past year, so that's, I guess, since I joined Eco, I would say biggest learning is it was really kind of what I said before, but in the opposite way. I've been very humbled in a really good way to see how much you can do with little resources. Like, I think on Twitter especially, and there's not a dig, I believe this is true, but there's a lot of people that are saying, oh, well, you know, marketers have to do BD, marketers have to do sales, they're also a founder, they're also social media analysts, they're also a graphic designer. Trust me, I do almost all those things too. But I think there's ways to scale, to your point, Paulina. Like, tools can scale. You can have really good processes. You can actually pace things out. There's certain announcements that are really important versus another. You don't have to push them all in the same month. There's ways to really take some time and be intentional. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're not aggressive. That just means you have a strategy that you follow and you don't chase. I think in crypto, a lot of people chases, myself included. There's a new thing, AI, boom, let's chase that. That's relevant. But like, for example, stablecoins are good enough right now. We don't need to chase AI. Like, I think AI is cool if it is naturally fitting, but we don't have to like force that into our narrative. And so I think, again, like going back to the original point, it's really about doing more with less. And I think that's a theme that I'll continue to push, especially in startups.
Yeah, focus. Like you said, you could have also done many other things except for stables, yes. But you decided to like linear focus.
Exactly.
I have to. There was a. It's good I didn't have to ask that question. Yes.
Yeah. Now you know.
Yeah. The last thing to wrap things up is, what's the upcoming things for Eco that we should be on the lookout for?
Any officer? What's the call, folks?
So call to actions, we're obviously going to be amazing. So you just check us out anyways. No, the real is we're getting ready for ETHCC, so we'll be present there. If there's any kind of in-person conversations that anybody listening wants to have, feel free to shout. I'm also based in New York. Ryan's based in SF. Noah, the COO, is based in Boston. So we're all pretty accessible from a major cities perspective. That extends true beyond these conferences as well. Everyone's coming to New York, it seems. So I'm not too far in Brooklyn. And I think in terms of alpha, not too much alpha necessarily, but look for accounts and crowd liquidity, the final kind of few steps until we're ready for mainnet launch. And then after that, it's a little bit of a TBD, but excited for that. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
How you do BD.
That's how you do BD. You do it live. Come on. Yeah,
exactly. On a stream.
Yeah,
I'll do the same too.
In my blood. But
Thanks,
yeah.
guys. See you guys around.
Ciao, ciao.